Hi, kiddos. Do you know who I am?
It's really Mrs. Lund. But do you guys know who I am? I'm going to tell you. I'm Mr. Paul Bunyan. Do I look like him? Well, I kind of hope not, but maybe. Today, you guys, we are going to do a tall tale on Mr. Paul Bunyan. This is such a great story. And the author, one of my favorites, is Stephen Kellogg. It's just like the Johnny Appleseed one we read the other day. So this one is called Paul Bunyan, A Tale Retold and Illustrated by Stephen Kellogg. Again, yesterday we talked about the retelling and how it's told over time, and maybe some of the details aren't quite the truth. Maybe they are. I mean, who are we to say, right? But I'm thinking there's a little bit of just some silliness happening in this one. So here we go. Paul Bunyan. Paul Bunyan was the largest, smartest, and strongest baby ever born in the state of Maine. Even before he learned to talk, Paul showed an interest in the family logging business. He took the lumber wagon and wandered through the neighborhood collecting trees. There were so many complaints about Paul's visits that his parents anchored his cradle in the harbor. All was well until Paul started rocking the cradle and stirring up waves. After his parents had paid for the damage, they decided to move to the backwoods, where life would be more peaceful. Paul loved his new wilderness home. He soon grew into a sturdy lad who was so quick on his feet he could blow out a candle and leap into bed before the room became dark. Every day he joined his forest friends in their sports. He raced with the deer and wrestled with the grizzlies. Do you like to wrestle with the grizzlies? One morning, Paul awoke to find the world under a blanket of blue snow. He heard a moan from inside a snowdrift, and there he found a shivering ox calf. Paul adopted him and named him Babe. Both Paul and Babe began growing at an astonishing rate, but the ox never lost the color of the snow from which he'd been rescued. As the years passed, the two of them proved to be extremely helpful in the family business. At 17, Paul grew a fine beard. See? A fine beard. Which he combed with the top of a pine tree. By the time other settlers were beginning to crowd into the Maine woods, Paul felt an urge to move on. He said goodbye to his parents and headed west. Paul wanted to cross the country with the best lumbering crew available. He hired Ole to celebrate blacksmith and two famous cooks, Sourdough Slim and Cream Puff Fatty. Then he signed up legendary lumbermen like Big Timber Burr, Hard Jaw Murphy, and the 7 Hackett brothers. Look at the 7 Hackett brothers. Paul put the camp buildings on wheels so that Babe could haul them from one forest to another. As soon as he had cleared the land, pioneers moved in and set up farms and villages. On the far slopes of the Appalachian Mountains, several of Paul's men were ambushed by a gang of underground ogres called gumbaroos. Paul grabbed the camp dinner horn and blew a thunderous note into the gumbaroos' cave, determined to blast the meanness right out of them. To Paul's dismay, the gumbaroos responded by snatching the entire crew. A wild rough and tumble rumpus began inside the den. When that historic tussle was over, the gumbaroos needed 6 weeks to untangle themselves. They disappeared into the depths of the earth, and they've never been heard of since. Paul's next job was to clear the heavily forested Midwest. He hired armies of extra woodsmen and built enormous new bunkhouses. The men sailed up to bed in balloons and parachute down to breakfast in the morning. Unfortunately, the cooks couldn't flip flapjacks fast enough to satisfy the newcomers. To solve the muddle, Paul built a colossal flapjack griddle. The surface was greased by kitchen helpers with slabs of bacon laced to their feet. Fueled by the powerful mixture of flapjacks and syrup, the men levied the Great Plains and shaved the slopes of the Rocky Mountains. They probably would have sawed the peaks themselves into logs if a blizzard hadn't suddenly buried the entire mountain range. That blizzard continued for several years, snuffing out the springs, summers, and autumns. The crew buried into the bunkhouses and hibernated. Babe became so depressed that Paul asked Ole to make a pair of sunglasses for his friend. When Babe saw the world colored green, he thought he'd stumbled into a field of clover. He began eating the snow, which with such gusto that soon the treetops reappeared. At that point, all those pent-up springtimes simply exploded, dissolving the storm clouds and the remaining snow. Paul and his friends invited some newly arrived settlers to join them in a celebration of all holidays that had been missed. That's my kind of party. After the festival, the lumberjacks continued their journey, but as they headed southwest, the blistering sun and the giant Texas varmints proved to be more of a problem than they had expected. Travel became so difficult that some of the men began to speak lonely of being buried by a blizzard or a bear hugged by a gumbaroo. While crossing Arizona, the griddle curled up like a burnt leaf, and the batter evaporated. Deprived of their flapjacks, the lumbermen became weak and discouraged. Paul's great axe fell from his shoulder, gouging a jagged trench, which today is known as the Grand Canyon. Disaster seemed certain until Paul came up with a desperate plan. He headed east and found a family that could sell him a barn filled with corn. Babe galloped it back across the desert. When the flaming sunrise hit the barn, it exploded, and the lumbermen awoke to find themselves in a raging blizzard of popcorn. Dizzy with joy, they pulled on their mittens and began blasting each other with popcorn balls. A westerly wind kept the cooling clouds of popcorn swirling around Paul and his crew until they crossed the California and reached the Pacific Ocean. Could you guys hold up a whale? I don't think so. After he had crossed the country, some say Paul gave up lumbering and rambled north, searching for new areas of untouched wilderness. With the passing years, Paul has been seen less and less frequently. However, along with his unusual size and his strength, he seems to possess an extraordinary longevity. Sometimes his great bursts of laughter can be heard rumbling like distant thunderclouds in the wild Alaskan mountain ranges, where he and Babe still roam. What did you guys think? Do you think that's a true story? Maybe some of the things are true, right? How was the Grand Canyon formed? I don't know. Maybe it was from Paul's axe, or excuse me, from my axe. All right, stay tuned. I'm going to show you how to build a beard. And I'm going to even attach it so I don't have to hold it anymore either. So watch for that. And I got a couple fun facts that I think you'll like. One including North Dakota. Okay, you guys. We are gonna make a beard. Who doesn't want to look like Paul Bunyan, right? Here's what you need. Paper plate, some string. I have a hole punch just because I have one. If you don't, you could just make a hole with your scissors. No big deal. And you'll need a scissors. And I have just some tissue paper, okay? If you don't have tissue paper, brown paper, brown markers, brown crayons, brown, anything you can think of to make your beard, okay? You could even put different tones of browns in if you wanted to really make it look really good, whatever you want to do. So what I did is I started off with just my paper plate, okay? And I can show you the back. I cut out because you got to get it underneath your nose, right? And then you have to cut out a little space for your mouth. Peekaboo! So that is how you start it, okay? Then you're going to have a blank piece of paper, or blank paper plate. Then you're just going to take whatever you decide. Yarn, brown leaves, you could even do anything you want. And I just put a whole bunch of glue on, and I just threw them on there. That's how easy. And I came up with this. What I did now too is put some extra on top. So then I just did another layer and threw them on so that I covered the entire paper plate. Okay, now for mine, I'm just going to punch in 2 holes. Okay, and then I'm going to take my yarn here. I'm going to just string it through and tie it. Just like that. Okay, and now that gives me a point so I know how tight I need to make it to go around my head. Okay, so I'm going to need at least that much string. Ooh, let me grab my scissors. All right, I'm just going to cut that right there. Put it around again. Oh yeah, that's going to be perfect. And then I'm going to just string it through. What you could always do too, so you don't see the string, is you could just cover that too, like that. This one will cover it so you won't even see it. So cool. Okay, then I'm going to put it on one more time so that I can tie it so that I know that it fits good. Oh, there we go. Perfecto. Oopsies. Ah, my string came out. Let's try that again. Here we go. And I'm going to tie it. Okay. And just like that, I am Paul Bunyan.